Well, hi, everyone who's joining us, and we'll get more people as we continue to talk. Obviously, Ken Burns needs no introduction. He's an American institution, and he's got an incredibly extensive body of work chronicling American history and culture. He has become a staple of public broadcasting, one of my favorite people to interview. And Ken has a new, very timely and really important series coming out. It's running. It premieres November 16th and runs through November 21st on PBS. And it is called The American Revolution. And he's here to talk to us all about it. And please, I want to make sure you guys. I want to be open to your questions. I'm sure Ken would love to hear from you all too. Substack is a really fun platform because, first of all, people who are interested are the ones who watch. You get very few trolls. Occasionally, I get a troll or two. Um, and I find that the audience and the people who are watching are really smart and interested in the world around them. So let's talk about this latest project, Ken. You've really turned your lens onto so many historical moments from, the Civil War, Vietnam, jazz, baseball. I can't name all your works, national parks, et cetera, et cetera. So tell me about your decision to focus on the Revolutionary War. Was this something you planned to have
No,
come out around
no.
around the
Oh,
250th anniversary?
I wish I could take credit for that, Katie. It's so great to be with you. No, I was working in December of 2015. That is 9 years and 11 months ago. We were working on the Vietnam film. I was looking at a map of the Ia Drang Valley in the Central Highlands, and I thought, wow, this could be the Redcoats moving west in Long Island towards Brooklyn in the Battle of Long Island, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, battle of the American Revolution. I lifted my head up. I said, we're doing the revolution next. Barack Obama still had 13 months to go in his presidency. Nobody was talking 250. It was a few years later that I turned to my co-director, Sarah Botstein, and said, if we finish a little bit earlier, not the fall of 25 as we projected, we could come out on the 250th anniversary of Lexington and Concord. And she, much smarter than me, said, nope, we'll still be mixing and onlining as we were last spring. But we did come out as we planned in November in just a couple of days. And it is, by the way, going to run all week, but it's going to stream for free immediately, the whole thing at pbs.org. And we just wanted to tell our origin story. We'd done the Civil War, we'd done World War II, we did the Vietnam War, and it's really important to go back. And then as we're editing, suddenly people are going, oh, you planned this for the 250. And we go, no.
We're not that smart.
We're not that smart. But the story of the origin, which is, I think, because it's a pre-photographic time, those people seem different to us. They're exactly the same. And what we wanted to do was remove the kind of opacity from the familiar boldface names, the, guys in Philadelphia thinking great thoughts. Those are great thoughts. But introduce you also to scores, literally scores of other people, women, Native Americans, teenagers, children, enslaved and free Black Americans, you name it, French, the English king, his ministers, his generals, his foot soldiers from Scotland and Wales, loyalists. We don't say loyalists are bad. We understand why you would be. The American Revolution is, I've said it, the most important event since the birth of Christ. It is for the first time.
That's a pretty serious claim,
For the
Ken.
first time in history, people are not subjects to some authoritarian power, but citizens. The most noblest aspirations of humankind are expressed in this revolution, though it has many hypocritical aspects, which we don't shy away from telling. It is a complicated story. It is violent. It is not just a revolution, but a civil war, Americans killing other Americans. It is a global war, the fourth global war over the prize of North America. And to bring it alive, we've had to do something we haven't done much in other films, which is film lots of reenactments, not of specific battles, but collecting over the course of 5 or 6 years, reenactors in French, in Native American, in Continental, in militia, in British, in Hessian garb, stuff, just hours and hours and hours of footage, not to sort of cover one particular battle, but to provide us a kind of critical mass of images that we can use to complement the paintings, the drawings, the documents, the commentary of scholars, the narration read by Peter Coyote, and then the 400 first-person voices read by, I think we have the greatest, after my hyperbole about Jesus Christ, let me add another one. I think we have the greatest cast that's ever been assembled for a movie, albeit reading off camera. But I've checked out like the credit list for The Longest Day about D-Day and other things. We have Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks and Paul Giamatti and Mandy Patinkin and Claire Danes and uh, Morgan Freeman and Samuel L.
Wow.
Jackson and Laura Linney and Sir Kenneth Branagh and Matthew Rhys and Domhnall Gleeson and Damian Lewis and Liev Schreiber, Jeff Daniels,
Wow.
Josh Brolin. I have only gone through Amanda Gorman, who read the inauguration poem for President Biden's inauguration. I've gone through maybe a quarter of the people.
Wow, that's amazing, Ken. Being a voice on a Ken Burns documentary series is on my bucket list. So keep me in mind
Keep it
for
in your
your
mind. That's right.
keep me in mind for your next project. I can be any historical figure you choose, good or bad. I wanted to ask you, you pretty much answered this question I had, but you're right. I think that the Revolutionary War is so steeped in mythology
That's
and
right.
sort of sanitized history. And because there are not, that we don't have photographs and it's mostly illustrated in paintings. I was thinking in the Civil War series, even you had daguerreotypes, right? And
Right.
you had visual illustrations for the story. But that answers my question. You used a lot of reenactment footage,
Yeah.
which is
And
so interesting. And is that just for sort of general images, as you said, not for any particular battle, but just
well,
to kind of talk
we
about
didn't
different people?
exactly. We didn't yield to reenactors doing, the next 10 minutes, the Battle of Monmouth. We have shots from the Battle of Monmouth reenactment, but within it are paintings and details and live cinematography and commentary. And so
And I'm
we
sure
don't
historical documents, right, Ken? You used a
documents
lot of those.
throughout, maps. We've used more maps in this film than in all the other films I've made combined, and I love maps. And some of them are CGI that we've done. Some of them are taking maps and making them more three-dimensional. Some of them are just leaving them alone. They're beautiful works of art. Some of them are just simply putting on the blue arrows for us and the red arrows for the Brits, and having you explain it and understanding the dimensions of the colonies. The Britain has 26 colonies in North America, the 13 that we know of, and 13 that are more profitable in the Caribbean because they're dependent on slave labor. Only Virginia and the Carolinas are profitable. We're the least profitable, but we're the most populous, and we produce things, and so we trade with them, and it's a complicated dynamic, not just of taxes and representation as the causes of the war and the separation, but Indian land. We want it. The Brits, having won the French and Indian War, can't afford to protect us, so that they say we can't take it. And so there's lots of struggles going on. And of course, when Jefferson writes the Declaration and says all men are created equal, he means all white men of property.
Right, of course.
And democracy is not on the agenda of the Declaration of Independence. Democracy is a byproduct, because the people who actually fight and win the war are not the sturdy militiamen, the property owners, the shopkeepers. They're there and they're important, but they also have to go home to plant their crops or to sow their crops, or because they're scared. The people who stay in the Continental Army are teenagers and ne'er-do-wells and felons looking for a pardon and second and third sons without a chance of an inheritance, and recent immigrants from Ireland and Germany, people who are out of work, and they win the war. And Washington calls it, nothing less than a standing miracle that we went up against the greatest military power on earth and won.
And, you do not shy away from the messy parts, as you've said. And what are some of the uncomfortable truths that are exposed in this series that might surprise people and make them uncomfortable?
Well, I think the most important one is this is just incredibly violent. I mean, we've sort of that's sanitizing, and you're absolutely right, Katie. That's exactly what we've done. It's kind of a Madison Avenue sanitized version that comes down to us. That it's just great men in Philadelphia thinking great thoughts, and that is a huge part of it. Do not get me wrong. We do not give that short shrift, but it is incredibly violent, and it is a civil war. There are people who are loyalists who are killing patriots, and patriots who are determined to have independence who are killing loyalists, and sometimes their neighbors, and sometimes their family members. There's a unbelievable scene. We follow a loyalist throughout the film named John Peters, who in our 4th episode is at the Battle of Bennington in what is now, or it's New York State, but it's very close to what is now Bennington, Vermont. Vermont didn't exist then. It was just a region contested by New England and New York. And he hears somebody say, "Peters, you damn Tory," a sort of a pejorative about a loyalist. And he recognizes the voice of his childhood friend Jeremiah Post, who sticks a bayonet in Peters' rib cage. It's deflected by the bone, and as Peter said, "I was then obliged to destroy him." So we see, sort of on camera, if you will, and we hear, and it's great when you have the greatest actors in the world reading about what this revolution is about, the killing of other people. There are 500,000 out of the 3 million that live in the 13 colonies that are either enslaved or free blacks. And Jefferson doesn't mean all men are created equal for them, but just raising these universal rights changes everybody's minds. Women now want the vote. Native Americans want freedom, and they want their own autonomy. They want their own sovereignty. Black people look to go, and sometimes they go to the British, sometimes they fight for the Americans. It is a complicated dynamic, and democracy isn't part of it. It's not the promise, it's the consequence, because those guys who fought it have to be promised something. So it isn't just going to be for the elites, the aristocracy, the Franklins and the Adams and the Jeffersons and the Washingtons. It's going to have to be for so-called ordinary people, and that's what makes this such a phenomenal, complicated, wonderful story. And women are throughout this story. They are at the heart of it. They are the center of why the resistance is successful in the years
Of
leading up
course
to
they
it.
are, Ken.
They're in every war. They're fighting in the war. They're attending. They're at the armies. They're cooking. They are tending to. They're burying the dead. They're washing the dead. They are back home running farms and businesses, and they're just central. One of the first, I believe, the first published history of the revolution is by Mercy Otis Warren, read by, in our case, Meryl Streep, which is a good person to have reading for you.
I'll say.
She's a satirist, a philosopher, a historian, and a poet. And she's got unbelievable comments. And she's friends with Abigail Adams, who, thank God, she and her husband are separated because they have the best correspondence you could possibly imagine. And she's, talking to her husband about, you got to remember the ladies. That's the line we remember. And then she goes on, and this is the line we never tell. So the difference between our film is we go, oh yeah, Abigail Adams said, remember the ladies. That's so cute, of course. And eventually 144 years later, we'll give the ladies the vote, that they don't really deserve it. And nowadays we're thinking of maybe taking it back and putting you in the kitchen and making sure that you're barefoot and pregnant all the time. But isn't that cute? But she says the next line is, all husbands would be tyrants if they could be, right? And if you don't give us some rights, some representation, we're likely to foment a revolution, a rebellion is what she said. So at the very beginning, the universal rights that are being expressed are deeply significant, as the legal scholar Maggie Blackhawk says in our film, to people at the margins, Black people, Native Americans, and women they're going, well, if these are universal rights, I want some too. So nobody ever really talked about the evils of slavery before the revolution, but once the revolution started, it's never on off anybody's lips. It is the conversation, and it'll take 69 years until the end of the Civil War and the 13th Amendment ending chattel slavery in the United States. And I'm sorry to say, 144 inexcusable years before women get the right to vote, but it's going to happen. And the second you say all in that word, the conservative scholar Yuval Levin told me the other day, that it's all over. It's done. It may take for a while, but it's done. It's over.
Good Lord, I want to live inside your brain for just an hour, Ken. You have so much that you store in that noggin of yours.
Yeah.
By the way,
No. Just come and do some decluttering. Come in. You're welcome. But just take out a few garbage bags full of junk.
I saw Deepak Chopra joined our conversation, and I just want to say hi, Deepak. Thank you for coming and for listening to Ken. By the way, maybe he could teach you how to meditate. Maybe that would help you.
I've done a lot of meditation and have since the early 70s. Yeah.
Oh, so you do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, all right. Well, I wanted to ask you a couple questions about, I mean, obviously you can't think about the Revolutionary War, and I don't think you can watch this series without thinking about the state of our country today. And you claim that we were much more divided then, which
Oh, oh God, yes.
I think that that might be reassuring for some people who feel
It
like
has to
that we
be.
have reached the zenith of polarization in our country.
So here's the deal. Every time, every present moment thinks it's the worst. It can't get any worse than this. I've made films about the Civil War. It was worse then. I mean, now a film about it was worse. I made film about Vietnam. There were hundreds of bombings between the late 60s and mid 70s in the United States. The divisions that we experience today are part and parcel of it. I think that when an individual is in crisis, you'd say, go see somebody, a pastor or a professional. And that professional, and I'm sure Deepak would agree, would begin asking questions that would say, you know, where'd you come from? Where were you born? Who are your parents? What was your childhood like? And you'd go back and begin to reassemble your narrative. I think when countries feel that they're divided and deep, going back to our origin story, being reassured by the fact it was a hell of a lot worse back then, and that we figured out a way for a wide variety of opinions to come together, that we have the possibility, I think, of studying the revolution and helping us put the us back in the US. That would be my one wish for the series, that you enjoy a good story. That's it. But to put the us back in the US would be part of it. And I didn't make this for one group. There's no political thumb on the scale. I'm calling balls and strikes here. And we live in a society where everything's a highlight reel, right? Everything's a highlight reel. And so if Babe Ruth is up to bat, he always hits a home run. Babe Ruth struck out more times than he hit a home run. And he only comes up to bat once every 9 times. So I can talk to you about George Washington and how without him we don't have a country. But sometimes it's the middle infielder, the second baseman, who's going to be the star of something. And let me introduce you to Joseph Plum Martin, 15 years old in July of 1776, a few days after the Declaration is signed, and he signs up from a Connecticut regiment and is blooded the next month in the Battle of Long Island, which may be the biggest battle of the Revolution, a devastating Patriot defeat. And he's that grunt complaining about the food, complaining about the weather, complaining about the marching, complaining about his superiors, who is there at Yorktown going over the final fort, Redoubt number 10, with Lafayette and Hamilton behind them, but him and black troops from now Rhode Island going over that thing. The person next to him is shot in the head and falls down crying out bitterly. He said, but there was no stopping us. And he gets over that. They bring in the French heavy guns, and Cornwallis is sealed. So this kid is there from the second year of the war to the very end. It's 6.5 years. He's there 5.5 years. And he is central to telling the story, along with, as I said, scores of other people.
Who plays that kid?
I think it's Joe Keery, the Stranger Things.
Oh,
Reads him. There's John Greenwood, a 14-year-old from Boston, and I always get confused which voice reads which. But Josh Brolin is George Washington.
wow.
Obviously, Paul Giamatti reprises his John Adams. We didn't have Laura Linney read Abigail as she did before, but she reads lots of other voices. And Claire Danes is a spectacular Abigail Adams. Jeff Daniels is Thomas Jefferson, and then they're just, you know, I could give every male part to Sir Kenneth Branagh if I wanted to. He does a German officer, he does a French officer, he does a British lord, he does an American soldier, he does an Irish soldier, he does a British soldier. I mean, you just give him the stuff and he reads it. Damian Lewis is unbelievable. He's
Oh my
King
God.
George. But other voices throughout the thing. Can you imagine working then or
No,
directing Meryl? Oh, that was great. Could you do it this way, please? And fortunately, I've worked with Tom Hanks and Meryl for years and years and years, and they're always so generous with their time. And Tom came in. I said, Tom, I'd give you George Washington in a second, but everybody's going to go, oh, that's Tom Hanks reading George. He says, I get it. So I gave him 14 voices. I think it's 7 or 8 different people. and usually, maybe a third of those voices would get in the film. Every single one of his voices are in. He's Reverend Andrew Elliott right after the Battle of Breed's Hill, which we call Bunker Hill. He's there talking about the British getting up on the parapets with the white flag and surrender. He's a Dr. Albigence Waldo at Valley Forge, who helps us bury a Native American soldier fighting for the Patriots who dies after valiantly fighting and succumbing to disease. I mean, it's so exciting. It's just
I'm glad
so
you haven't
exciting.
lost your
I
enthusiasm for your
know, but
work, even
I
though this
haven't.
is
You
something
know,
you got me.
I have the best job in the country. You know that every time I went on with you on today, we would just talk about this is like to get in I had no idea. We never go and do stuff we know about. I know a little bit of stuff about the revolution. It's that we engage the scholars from the beginning. We read, and then we
Well, I
try
was
to
going to
tell
ask
this.
you about that, Ken, because I know this took a decade to put together.
Yeah.
And I cannot imagine kind of tackling this kind of behemoth project. And you have all these smart people around you. I know you had two co-directors. By the way,
Yes.
Sarah Botstein, I loved the US and the Holocaust.
Yep. She was a co-director on
I
that, Sarah
thought that was
Boston. Yep.
such an important film that
She's
I
our
can't
major
recommend.
general in this. I don't leave home without her. She's so great. David Schmidt is the other co-director. Jeff Ward, who wrote the Civil War and baseball and jazz and World War II and the Roosevelts, and Vietnam is the writer here. The companion book just came out on Tuesday, and it is I think the most
Oh, I
beautiful
can't
thing.
wait to get that
Yeah,
too.
it's so beautiful. We'll send it. It's so lovely. It's bigger than anything we've done. He said, I can't do as big a job as I've done in the past. And then, of course, he did. He outdid himself. The subject is so important. And I think you're right to bring the contemporary times. If you want to Chicken Little this, you want to wring your hands, you want to lie in a fetal position and suck your thumb, you can do that. But that doesn't get anything done, right? What gets done is understanding what's at the heart of our revolution is this idea that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the pursuit of happiness is not acquiring things, it's lifelong learning. It's to acquire virtue. To virtue then makes you worthy of this great gift that no one has had yet in all of human history, which is citizenship and equality. And this is big deal stuff. And while there's monumental hypocrisies then and have attended almost every moment up to then and now, you can still look to the revolution and be inspired by the noblest aspirations of humankind. That second sentence of the Declaration, we hold these truths to be self-evident, is the second greatest sentence in the English language. The first is, of course, I love you.
I think Walter Isaacson is writing a book about what is Walter's book, Courtney, about? The greatest sentence ever written, but we'll find out in a second. But Ken, I can't help but wonder that as you really immersed yourself in this and you saw what was happening in this country over the last 10 years, are there lessons here about unity and how we can sustain a democracy in this great American experiment when there are so many forces seeming to undercut the very principles upon which this country was founded?
Yeah, of course, because if you study the revolution, 6.5 years of people trying to undercut this thing, and it was never, I mean, we look back on it, we think it's a foregone conclusion. It wasn't. George Washington didn't know he was George Washington, right? He was going to have a dollar bill and a quarter and a big spiky thing in the national capital, which is named for him, and a state on the other side of the continent, and every state has a town or a county named for him. He didn't know that. He didn't know it was going to work out. Even when the French said, we'll come in and help you in what Stacy Schiff says in our film is the equivalent of $30 billion. He doesn't know he's going to win. And when the British take Charleston, he thinks it's all over. It's not going to work. And so the overcoming of these obstacles is exactly right. And I think we made this film for everybody. We don't have a political, thumb in this game. And you can go back and see what the values were that animated our republic. And you can come back and make some decisions for yourself about what's going on. But let me say something. Over the 10 years, people like to say history repeats itself. It never has. No event has ever happened twice. Mark Twain is supposed to have
It
said,
rhymes.
it rhymes. And that's such a perfect thing because you have to see them. Every film I've made from Brooklyn Bridge on, you see all the rhymes. There's, municipal corruption in New York City. Shock, shock, back while they're making the Brooklyn Bridge. But the thing is, we have to be, as filmmakers, disciplined not to pay attention because they'll change. And I'll give you an example. If our film had come out a year earlier, last fall, we've had for many years this quote by a German officer's wife who's traveling across the Atlantic to join her husband. And she's worried about the fact that she hears that Americans eat cats. So if this had come out a year ago, and we were all in the thing discussing the immigrants that ate cats in Springfield, Ohio, you'd say, oh, can you put that in just to do? I think it'll go over people's heads and no one will notice it this time around. Everybody will find something. If you point out the rhymes and say, oh, isn't this so much like today? You've dated it. Today is a school day in America, and in hundreds of classrooms, they are playing today, as they did yesterday and will tomorrow, clips from our Civil War series. Not the whole thing, but maybe 40 minutes on Lincoln or the Gettysburg Address or women in the Civil War or, black soldiers, whatever it might be, and lots of other films. You want this to last by having a discipline that says, the Bible is right. Old Testament, Ecclesiastes, there's nothing new under the sun. Human nature doesn't change. It superimposes itself over the seemingly random chaos of events. And then you hear these motifs and echoes and rhymes. And they're there because human nature doesn't change. The same amount of venality and virtue is back then as there is now. The same amount of generosity and greed back then and back now. And that's our job, is to be mindful of that, but not sort of say, oh, isn't that so much like today? A good story transcends the sort of binaries of red state, blue state, young, old, gay, straight, rich, poor, all the things that we do.
But any lessons from, listen, I've said this so often, sorry to repeat myself to my followers, but I've so often asked, what can we do, about this situation in this
I'll tell
country?
you.
And are there
Yeah, that's
any
right there.
lessons?
The instruction guide is so clear. First of all, you're a citizen. George Washington thought that was the highest honor in the land. Look, we don't have a country without George Washington. Deeply flawed, rash, makes some bad battlefield mistakes, but is able to inspire people in the dead of night to fight, people who are going home because their enlistments are up. He can convince them to fight, but he leaves power twice. Citizenship, education, pursuit of happiness means lifelong learning. Vote, be involved, find out what the school board, find out what the city council is doing, be involved. This is where things happen in the margins. They don't happen in the big things, and they certainly don't happen if you're on your phone fretting every single moment of the day about how it's Chicken Little, the sky is falling, everything is so bad. You actually have to make a difference in people's lives. The novelist Richard Powers said, the best arguments in the world, and all we do is argue, the best arguments in the world won't change a single person's point of view. The only thing that can do that is a good story. I'm just hoping that the story we tell is a good story and that people will go in, find purchase. There's something for everybody here. This is our story, whether you came over on the Mayflower or were here 22,000 years ago when you crossed the land bridge from Asia as a Native American, or you just arrived and just got your green card or just got your citizenship. There is a story in the revolution that will connect to you, and then you will own it. And if you own it, then you own the values of it, which is, it's best described by a German soldier we followed throughout the film. His name is Johann Ewald, Captain Johann Ewald, and he's openly contemptuous of what the Brits and the Germans call the rebels. They never call us patriots. They never call us, whatever. Sometimes they'll say the Americans disdainfully, but they mostly call us rabble or rebels. And he on the other hand, has to be part of the surrendering army at Yorktown. And he says, who would have thought 100 years ago that out of this multitude of rabble could arise a people who could defy kings? That is the story of the American Revolution right there. That for the first time in human history, people got rid of a monarch. It's unbelievable. It had never happened before. And it's part of the story of what we did. And we created citizens and not subjects. It's in the interests of authoritarians to have us dumb, superstitious, committed to conspiracies,
Or
and
disengaged?
or disengaged. Oh, I don't have anything to
overwhelmed.
do with, I'm overwhelmed, or whatever it is. And it is the duty of the citizen and the patriot to be engaged, to find out the facts, not to believe the latest conspiracy theory or jump down that rabbit hole that we know the tragedies of all the people's lives ruined by not getting their news from a place that checks their sources, right? So people
Yeah.
ask me, what's the solution to all of this stuff? I say, read the New
He
York
he
Times,
laughs nervously. Go on.
the Wall Street Journal. These people, the New York, they fact check their stuff, right? And there, most people don't, and they can put out, whatever they want to say. We can't do that. We agonize. Sarah Boston and I stay up all night worrying about. We just had a footnote in our script where it says 16, I don't know, battleships or months are dead, and we've got two sources that say 16, but now a new scholar has come in and says we're not quite sure. So we go into the narration and copy the word perhaps from another place and move it and say perhaps 16th, and then you go, okay, I can sleep at night. And so if you believe that, and we did that 1,000 times, you can believe that it's true for the larger facts of this thing.
I have a couple more questions, Ken, then I'm gonna let you go, and wow, you must drink a lot of caffeine, Ken, because I don't know.
Well, I just have a couple cups of green tea in the morning. If I had anything more, I would just
Okay, good. All right, well, cut him off, everybody. But I want to read what Jill Lepore wrote about this in your project in the New Yorker. She said, and I'm a big Jill Lepore fan. What
yeah, who ain't?
distinguishes the American Revolution is its fidelity to the best and most sophisticated scholarship, searing, challenging, and explosively interesting, especially as intellectual history. The Trump administration won't restore truth and sanity to American history, but this film does. What a nice review, huh?
It's so nice. And I'm excited about that because military.com wrote almost the same thing. What's so extraordinary about it is that he exposes Washington's flaws as well as his strengths, right? That he brings in people whose stories are not often told in the revolution, like women and native people and enslaved and free Black Americans. That's from military.com. George Will just wrote like a peon to this in his most recent column. So I think we're onto something because we've called balls and strikes, because we told the story of what actually happened, and everybody loves a complex story. Everyone, left,
Well,
right, or
this
center.
this brings me to my next question, Ken. Is one of the preeminent historians in American culture today. Personally, I have been really concerned and at times offended by these new efforts to really whitewash American history, to whether it's national parks or whether it's something at Arlington National Cemetery, an effort to make, to talk about some of the Black soldiers who died in various conflicts, to this whole PragerU, which is this animated series that's being shown in a lot of public schools all across the country that basically gloss over things like slavery and, to present this pristine view of history that's simply isn't accurate.
Right.
And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on this reversion to a brand of history that is not factually accurate, that presents American history, through rose-colored glasses, and gives the impression that Americans never did anything wrong.
Yeah,
And
well, it's
Howard Zinn kind of tried to turn this on its head with, talking about history from the point of view of the oppressed instead of the oppressor. But it seems like we've made so many strides in giving a more inclusive and a more
yes.
accurate view of our history. And now we're going backwards. And it's
Yep.
so frustrating
It
to
is
me.
so
And as a
frustrating.
historian, I can only imagine how you feel.
Yeah, it's terrible, and it happens. It's the course of human events. You go forward, you go back, and yes, it's simple. It's in an autocrat's interest to want to simplify this story and make it only one thing, but you can't do that. I mean, even the supposedly darling of conservative stuff, storytelling. Yellowstone is itself so complicated. The hero of it is this great man, wise man, who also murders people and dumps their bodies in caverns. He's got a strong-willed daughter who does the same thing. He's got two sons, one of whom is married to a Native American and conflicted about the whole thing about land, and the other is Benedict Arnold, and the daughter's in love with the foreman who's in charge of a ranch hands that are gay and straight, young and old, white and black, and around them are Native Americans wanting land and also the greed of other people. I mean, this is supposed to be the darling of conservative dramas, and it's got all of those things in it. So we can overreact and wring our hands at these sorts of movements, but a good story is a good story. It's a good story. I mean, the absurdity of this is they took out the word Enola Gay from a website because of the word gay. Now, Enola Gay is the name of the mom of the pilot who dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, and he named his plane after his mom, the Enola Gay, right? So this is what happens,
It's not only frustrating, it's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing. Of course it's embarrassing. And what you want is a complicated, so everybody wants a complicated, and we put it into these binaries and it never works. I mean, like, look at any dictatorship. How did that work out? Democracy is really messy. And it's a lot of times people say, I get it. We need something better than democracy. And whatever it is they suggest is 10 times worse than it, and it doesn't last. It can't sustain itself because the human impulse towards freedom and equality and connection with each other cannot be separated by some ridiculous dicta that we can only tell it a certain way. If you don't think slavery was an important part and still is today an important part, Chris Rock, a friend of mine, great, hilarious.
Name dropper.
He's out in college campuses and he's saying, I'm a multimillionaire. You wouldn't change your place for me for 1 second. Like, because when you and I go to the convenience store, there's not a question of where we're going to live or die. But every African-American family to this day has to wonder, be careful, right? When you go to the convenience store, right? Why is that? So there's a lot of work to be done. And all of this other stuff is a distraction from the work that has to be done, that was begun back on Lexington Green on April 19th, 1775, when we just said no.
Well, that's a great way to end it. I mean, I'd love to have more of a conversation with you about sort of how history is being distorted and perverted and
Always has
glossed
been.
over.
Always has been. Always has been. Like, what we call the Confederate flag is not the flag of the Confederacy. It was a different flag than that. The flag that we call the Confederate flag is is one flag of the Army of Northern Virginia, the Confederate Army, the main Confederate Army that Robert E. Lee led. But it was adopted after the Civil War by our own homegrown Al-Qaeda or ISIS called the Ku Klux Klan. And its popularity worked its way into every one of the Southern flags. And that's not the Confederate flag. They've never put the Confederate flag into their state flags. They put the Ku Klux Klan's adopted flag into it. So the more you know, the more you know.
Exactly. Is that in the Civil War series that flag was
But
not
we
the
showed what
Confederate
the
flag?
flag was, and then we showed how it got popularized. But it's certainly in many other films we've done that come up to the present. We're working on right now a history. My daughter Sarah Burns and her husband David McMahon and I and Erica Dilday are making a film about Reconstruction, and it's definitely a part of this story. Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely have to interview Isabel Wilkerson for that.
Well, done it. Already done it.
You know everything, Ken.
Oh yeah,
Anyway,
and Lonnie Bunch, who's on a
yeah.
hot seat of all hot seats, and
Oh,
lots of other
interesting.
great scholars of the
Sherilyn
United States.
Eichel.
Oh, got her. Yep.
Okay, good.
Keep
Well,
going, keep
listen,
going. Yeah.
it's great to see you, Ken. I'm sure
Great to see
everyone
you.
loved hearing from you. I can't keep up with that brain of yours. I cannot wait to watch this series. And I was thinking, I'm hosting my family, some family members for Thanksgiving this year. And I think it would be such a great way to when you're in that turkey, what's it?
Yep.
How do you say that thing when you
Yeah,
eat too much turkey?
tryptophan. Yeah, when
Yeah.
you're just
But
in that
yeah,
that
when you're in
coma.
that daze after you eat turkey, or maybe earlier so you can pay attention. It would be so great to watch this series and
Together with
with
folks.
your
I agree.
family
Free
and
free streaming, pbs.org. Everybody can get it for free and watch it anytime they want, starting Sunday. And you can, if you want to do it like me, the old-fashioned way, broadcast, I'll be there watching with you.
Well, thank you so much for all the work you do, Ken. I mean, you're a treasure. You really are, and
Thank you, love.
have done so
Great to
much
see
for the
you.
country.
Great to see you.
Great to see you. Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Okay,
everyone.
bye, Ken. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.